In a moment, I'm going to introduce a couple wonderful panelists, and we're going to have a discussion on the theology of place and how that's lived out, specifically in Denver, but really in the world. Before I bring up those panelists, though, I just want to share with you a little bit about Denver Institute for Faith and Work. So, as Greg said, I work for that organization. I've been with them for about a year and a half. I lead advancement. That's a fancy word for fundraising, but that's not what tonight is about. I'm just glad to share in an organization that's committed to formation. That's what Denver Institute is committed to. And it's really fun for me to be a part of that and a part of tonight. So as I said, just a little bit about what Denver Institute does and is all about, and then I'll introduce this topic and these panelists. So we are an educational nonprofit, and we really are dedicated to formation, to discipleship, in Greg's words, to whole life discipleship. So we're forming men and women to serve God, neighbor, and society through their daily work. We actually believe God can change the world through Christians living out the life of Christ, living out the grace of Christ Monday through Friday. And I know I'm preaching to the choir in this room and on Zoom that's a commitment that the Karam Forum is also dedicated to. But that is our mission. A little bit about how we go about doing that. We have what's called the 5280 Fellowship. Most of you know Denver is the Mile High City, so that's why we named our fellowship by that title. It is a 9-month, fairly intensive spiritual formation program, experience, community for early to mid-career professionals. So we've been doing that now for 7 years. We have 7 classes, well over 100 alums. You're going to meet 2 of them tonight. If you're in the fellowship, it's 9 months long. You study theology pretty rigorously. You learn spiritual formation. You come out of it having done a professional project. You also come out of it with a rule of life. So really tools to do that kind of whole life discipleship for the whole of your life. So it's been a wonderful thing, I think, for our city. And by the way, we're trying to expand that around the country through an initiative that we have called Citygate. We do a lot of other things, including 2 amazing events. One's coming up in March. It's called Business for the Common Good. This last year, we had well over 300 participants. One of them said, spending a day with fellow Christians who are truly working for the common good is so encouraging. It spurs me on to follow the kingdom way, even when it is hard. This is an event like no other. Also, a really unique event is in the fall every year. It's called Women Work and Calling. One participant this last October said, everything from the people to the content to the range of depth and specificity, it was honestly one of the best conferences I've attended. So we're, with those events, trying to equip and inspire Christians to live out their faith through their work. So again, that's just a little bit about what Denver Institute does. And I'm mostly excited for you who are here in the room and who are watching online to get an experience of that by learning from, hearing from a couple of our fellows on this topic of a theology of place. And I've entitled this session, Heavenly Cities, Placed Peoples and Peopled Places. I think you can sense where I'm going with that title. I don't think I'm going to win any awards for the title. I don't think if I wrote a book that would really work for any publisher, but the point is this, and I think I would get agreement in this room online, that the story of God is really the story of God's people in particular places. So those peoples affect the place, and those places affect the people. And that's really one way to read the biblical narrative as a whole. That's really one way to understand the gospel as a whole. And also for all the individual stories that we find in Scripture, you really can't understand them without paying attention to all of the particular places that these stories are set. The people in the stories are connected to those places, and the places are connected to those people. And of course, you see this lived out in the life of Jesus. You see Jesus emphasize this. Even in this great lament that he has for Jerusalem, when Jesus draws near the city, he weeps. Jesus, though, is not weeping for just some general unspecified city. He's also not weeping for the world at large at that point. He's weeping for a specific city called Jerusalem. that is a particular place with a particular people. And he's weeping for the brokenness in that particular place. And he's weeping for the injustice in Jerusalem, which is different from injustice in other cities. This is why place matters. And as followers of Jesus, we need to pay attention to the particular place we're in. Jesus wants us to follow him in unique places. And that's really the topic for tonight. Before I bring up our two fellows, and you're going to hear from their wisdom, I gained my own theology of a place, of course, from scripture, but my eyes were trained on that prominent theme by Wendell Berry. Now, I hope many of you are familiar with Wendell Berry, incredible poet, philosopher, essayist, and also novelist, and really, particularly in his Port William novels, Berry really exposits this theme of a theology of place. Probably my most favorite character in the Port William novels. Port William is this fictitious town in Kentucky, and it has what's called the membership, which are the people of the town, kind of a churchy word for the people of the town, and they're connected to this place. And one of them is a character named Jaber Crow. He's the town barber. I think intentionally his initials are JC. And Jaber is really this great pastoral figure in the town of Port William. And one night he has this vision, and it's really a vision of the heavenly city. So I'll just read a few sentences from Barry from the lips of Jaber Crow, and then I'll introduce our panelist. Jaber says this: in Port William, or beyond it or above it, Jaber imagines a kind of heavenly city in which each house would be built on a marriage and around it, and all the houses would be bound together in friendships, and friendliness would move and join among them like an open street. His living in Port William has been a bearing of the descent of that town from that ideal, as though at the end of each night, out of his mind and his desire, he gives painful birth to the new real morning and the real town, as though he watches the descent of all things from heaven like snowfall. And I could go on, it's quite good, but I think you get the point, is that we as Christians, we do have a vision of a heavenly city. And yet we live in real cities named Denver and Los Angeles and Cincinnati and San Francisco. And God is moving all of those cities towards God's vision of a heavenly city. And we believe, I think Denver Institute, Karam Forum, is doing that largely through the work of God's people in those cities who are paying attention to that particular unique place in which they find themselves. So having introduced you to that topic, let me introduce you to our speakers, and then I'll invite them up here. So both of these are alumni of our 5280 Fellowship. So Tim Barr is a principal at an architectural office here in Denver with Canon Design. And Kelly Leadbetter is a consultant with a local firm working in the area of transportation planning. So two wonderful people, and would you welcome them up to the stage with me, please? Yeah, so Tim, Kelly, come on up, grab a microphone. I think they probably need to turn the mics on and have a seat, and we'll get going with our discussion. So again, Tim and Kelly, thanks, welcome, and really glad for your willingness to speak into this topic and to share. And I love that both of you are alums of our 5280 Fellowship. In fact, you were in the same class together, so this is kind of a fun reunion. And in unique ways, you really are both living out this theology of a place. You really are pursuing this vision of a heavenly city. And you've paid attention to that in particular ways in your careers. So I kind of briefly introduced you. I just gave your titles. But my first question for both of you, I want you to explain a little bit more. So talk about both the what of what you do, and then actually a little bit more length, the why of what you do. And I think with that why, you're going to begin to talk about this theology of a place and really pursuing this idea of a heavenly city. So Tim, let me start with you. Say more about what you do and also the why, what motivates you to do that work.
Sure. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm going to preface this with I'm nowhere near a theologian. I'm a recovering evangelical, I think, in a lot of ways. But it was really eye-opening for me to go through the fellowship program. I think I was, I'm kind of cresting the middle and heading towards kind of the latter part of my career. And I think I've just been such a part of this like 3-part gospel mentality, just growing up in the church and kind of going away from the church for a long time and coming back and just trying to ask myself, why does it all matter? And it was just such a cool thing to see how God is just in everything that we experience and do as architects. And really, I run Canon Design here in Denver. We're a global design solutions firm. So we have engineers and planners and strategists all kind of focused around the built environment and how we can really kind of transform spaces in a really innovative way. We've been on Fast Company's most innovative firms list for the last 5 years in a row, just for thinking differently about design and how that really impacts people's lives. And personally, I think it's really cool to be part of a secular company in a lot of ways that really identifies with transformation and human flourishing. I mean, quite down to like our mission statement. And I'm really able to latch onto that as a believer and push those ideas as we go after new work and as we start thinking about how design impacts people's lives. And not only externally, but also internally, as I've got 40 people that roll up underneath me that I'm all trying to make sure that they're happy and that they're able to flourish within our own walls. So there's a lot to it, but it's nice to not have 2 days that are ever the same. And it's always really interesting. I mean, good, bad, and different. It's a lot of fun to try to unpack.
And later, you're going to say more about flourishing and how that lives out at Canon Design. Say a little bit more about your personal motivation. I imagine you could do a number of things. You could work for a number of different companies. Why this particular company, and what's the draw to the kind of work that you're doing personally?
Yeah, my interest in architecture goes back to I was really little and I was building these block cities, I think when I was like 4 or 5, and my parents took photos of me on the floor, and they're like, oh my gosh, you're going to be an architect someday. So I really thought I wanted to be an architect. And I went to school at CU, enrolled in the architectural program, and quickly transferred majors because I got scared that if I become an architect, I'm going to invest a ton of time. And if I don't like it, then I'm kind of pigeonholed with a degree. So I went ahead and transferred over to business school. I got a business degree, but I've been really fortunate and blessed to have stayed in the field for the last 25 years. Working in a variety of different positions from operations to marketing. I worked for a development firm for a while in San Diego. But what I think is really, really cool, and we can all identify with this, is you walk into certain spaces and you have an emotional response, right? I'm sure you can think of probably the first church that you ever attended, and you can probably smell the smells and see the sights and know what the light situation was like. And we have emotional, like real emotional and physical connections to space. And it's just really exciting for me to be a part of a firm that thinks deeply about that. And I'm still like super inspired, no matter what it is that we're doing, just to be able to walk through new spaces and see these places that we're creating that could be 100 to 200 to 300-year-old buildings that are going to stand the test of time long after I'm gone. So it's just really exciting to be a part of that.
Yeah, love that. And Kelly, I want to ask you the same question, although just kind of building on what Tim just said. What are your earliest memories of design? So Tim was playing with blocks. Do you have memories like that?
I do quite a bit. And I appreciate hearing, I actually started school in architecture at the University of Cincinnati. And after a year of very intensive studios, thought, well, this is very abstract. Who pays for this? What's the financial reality? Like this, we can't just be literally taking apart dishwashers and refrigerators and documenting that and piece by piece. And so I radically shifted to economics and thought, well, I'm gonna sort out the financial side of this. All kind of came full circle, and I graduated with a degree in urban and regional planning. For me, that was where it was the pragmatic side of the financial and kind of political realities in which decisions are made on a daily basis. It's learning about that, but it's also the creativity that comes with thinking about places, less so about an individual building or an individual room or space, but thinking about how those spaces relate to one another, and really create these cities that have unique identities. So, to say that we're in Denver, that comes with a very probably preconceived notion for everybody who's on Zoom of what that means we're in Denver. And I think tonight it lives up to that. It's snowing, right? So we all had different commutes here. But if we were to meet somewhere
usually
else.
about like what unique product you can buy in Colorado. That's
It is,
often the
sure.
first thing that comes to the mind.
So yes, I do have a very similar kind of educational background as Tim, and certainly, yes, thought architecture. Certainly, I didn't know what city planning was until I was in college. So to have a degree that I didn't even know what that was really until I started in a design school, and now to be in that profession about 10 years into my career. And yeah, it's wild. So certainly at the onset, it's often, well, what do you do? What is Felsberg Holt Nolovig? Is that a law firm? We're not a law firm, although that our name does give nod to the three gentlemen that started the company. And yeah, so we are a civil engineering firm. We identify as a civil engineering firm that can take you from concept all the way through construction. So we have environmental scientists, we have civil engineers, structural engineers. I work in a group specifically focused on planning and outreach and engagement to facilitate those projects. And then kind of at the very end, we have civil engineers again and structural engineers, but who work in the construction field and who are out building roads and sidewalks and intersections and trails. And
Kelly, we're going to be asking you and Tim how you do see yourself living out your faith Monday through Friday, but also something I would ask Tim, what just motivates you to get up Monday through Friday to go to this job, which as I've been talking to you, it sounds like it can be quite demanding. What's your personal motivation for this work?
Yeah, I think personally. Is this still? Oh, okay. Thank you. Personally, I think that motivation comes in large part from the possibility. I think I really appreciate the creative process by which we can go about thinking about these projects. I mean, on a daily basis, similar to what Tim said, I don't have 2 days that look the same. Sometimes I'm out counting pedestrians, and on a sidewalk, and other times, I'm at a meeting with political or elected officials, trying to work through complex decision making. So I think above all, the motivation comes from thinking about what could be and the potential that lies within these projects. And so that certainly is a space that, I don't know, when you can be in that space and then you have to layer on the financial realities and the political realities and different things in the decision-making process, but to be able to embody that creative space is really motivating.
Love that. I want to start by asking you about planning and design. With both of you do both of those things in unique ways. And again, you're living out a formed Christian life. And Denver Institute has been blessed to be at least a part of that as you experience the fellowship, but you've been probably formed through churches and mentors in the gospel. And I want to start with this idea of planning and design. And certainly as we look at that story of the gospel from creation to redemption to eventually the eschaton and this heavenly city, we see in God's heart and in God's work, both planning and design. So Kelly, I'm going to start with you, and you and I even been chatting about this, but what do those words, planning and design, mean to you? And is that an expression of your faith as you do your work, and how so?
Yeah, I think certainly it is an expression of my faith. I think with that motivation that I was speaking to earlier, I think God as that ultimate creator, right? Like looking to his creativity. When Jeff and I initially spoke, I talked about this idea of, well, what's that first place? Let's get an idea of what God created. And we see Adam and we see Eve and we see Eden. And I don't know that I experience on a daily basis as a user of these built spaces, the same safety and the same security that Adam and Eve had when they were in Eden. And so I think to start and really understand that God is the ultimate creator, to look at what he created and the intention behind what he created and the characteristics then that come along with that, the safety, the security, the ability to be connected with God too. I think there's a connectedness there that our built environment now prohibits, can prohibit, but to each other and also to God. And I think the idea that we can look to God for motivation and for an understanding of how to be creative, given how he is created to date, is really like, I don't know, I would say one lens by which I approach my work.
Yeah, love that. Thanks, Kelly. And same for you. Planning and design, it's in the title of your company. How do you experience it, daily, weekly, and how is that an expression of your faith?
Yeah, I think it's, kind of coming from my kind of old school background, if you will. I think we tend to like block out like these components of our lives. Like this is my Christian life. This is my, secular life. This is my job. This is, and we kind of stack these things on top of each other, and architects will tend sometimes to look at program the same way. They're like, okay, this is where all the pews are going to go. Up here is where the worship is going to happen. Over here is going to be back of house. And I think we have taken a completely like different approach to the way that we think about design. So we have lenses. I love the way that I love that you use that term, because we look at people first and foremost. Like, how do we really breathe life into people? How does that breathe life into business? How does that breathe life into society? And then what does that, look like with the environment at large? And all of these things are really complex and orchestrated. Like we look at God's creation and we look at just like the way that he breathes life into just plants and things. And the whole ecosystem of what we have is really complex. And I love the fact that we can, just take a stance to say, what, it doesn't like being a Christian and a believer doesn't stop on Sundays. It works into my daily life. I don't need to be in a nonprofit to have value in the world. Like this is really part of who God created me to be. And it weaves into everything else that we're doing, like throughout our whole lives. And so we're looking at design kind of in that same format to say, what if we just kind of take the walls off these traditional design ideas that we've had and start thinking about it holistically in terms of the human experience.
But it sounds like what you're saying is you're taking cues from the design of creation. And I mean, both of you are kind of like quintessential Coloradans, always outside, running, hiking, climbing mountains. Colorado's a pretty good place to look at the design of creation, but it sounds like as you have those eyes to see, and it doesn't have to be magnificent mountains, it can be maybe more pedestrian elements of God's creation, but you start to be inspired for the design work you're doing. Is this what you're saying?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Like I'm a trail runner, and Kelly's a marathoner on the road. So we both experience both of those extremes, right? But yeah, absolutely. Like the inspiration that comes from all of it is just super important.
And I appreciate that, Jeff, because I do think there's this association to Colorado of, the natural environment, this beauty that comes from nature. And that is true. And I would say that is true. And there's this beauty in the built environment as well. So I think for both Tim and I don't know every one of your projects, but certainly the majority of what I spend my day thinking about is a redemption of the built environment, or a newness of the built environment, a change of the built environment that is needed because there's currently a brokenness. And I don't know. So it's just distinct, because I do think there's this association again to kind of that natural, but when we think about the built environment, there's a beauty there as well that I think we can both experience and also be a small part of creating.
Yeah, and absolutely. And your work, both of you, contributes to that clearly, whether it's a building or a transportation system design, a city park, even like you and I were talking about those third spaces like city parks, even how a sidewalk is designed. There can be a beauty to that, especially if it's a beauty that lends towards community. And that's that connection between place and people. Tim, let me start with you for this next question. So let's talk a little bit about space and place. And by the way, I do have your slides ready in case, just tell me and I'll click through them. But those two words that rhyme, they're unique though as well, space and place. And what does that have to do with human flourishing, which is important to you personally, Tim, important to your company?
Yeah, so I do have slides. It's my leadership crutch, if you will. So sorry, you'll have to bear with me. But I did want to share a couple of things because you talked about my connection to my company. And so this is a slide that's in our corporate deck. This is the first thing that we show at a lot of our internal meetings as well as some of our client meetings, but really starting with why. So I said we're a global solutions firm. We unite designers, builders, strategists, engineers with a single purpose to help people continuously flourish. So this is our purpose. This is our mission. This is why we exist. This was not written by me. This is like handed down from the corporate folks on high, but it's really, really powerful when you start thinking about these words. And I connect like spiritually. I mean, I think flourishing is it's become more and more used in Christian circles. I think just recently I hear the word a lot. It's referenced through the Old Testament like 30 some odd times. I mean, it's all through the Old Testament, almost all through the Old Testament. When the word flourishing is used, it's used in terms of some sort of plant growth, right? Like, there's just this flourishing that happens from a seed to full maturity, or it's used in some sort of context of the built environment. So we see it all through Psalms and Proverbs, where the house of the Lord will flourish. And the fact that, one of my favorite, I actually wrote this down because I thought this was like a really cool contrast, but there's this verse in Proverbs 14:11 says, the house of the wicked will be destroyed, but the tent of the upright will flourish. And I've been meditating on that a lot because I was like, whoa, that's crazy. Like it's a house but a tent is going to flourish because it's about the people. Right. And so everything we do at my organization is built around this mission. And I just wanted to share like one kind of cool thing that we're getting into, this biophilic design, which is just really based around this connection that we have naturally, whether it's the way that our brains work and connect to the environments that we're in. And so the next slide, I think that I put up here, if you want to go to it, is a matrix that we've been using within some of the healthcare systems nationally, where we're really looking at all of these design elements, just different types of like high ceilings. What does daylighting do? Colors, contrast, fresh air, all this like fancy architectural stuff that, people think about all the time, but really what that is doing within the body. So what sort of neurochemicals are being released when you walk into a lobby of a hospital? Does it release serotonin? Does it release dopamine? What sort of spaces can we have different releases of different neurofeedback to help students learn or be more productive? And what does these spaces look like? So this just kind of goes into that. The next slide just goes right along with it, because then we start unpacking what the different pieces of that really look like. Like we can actually design now acoustics that lower stress. Like we can bring natural shapes and patterns in that help with relaxation and concentration. Fractals and things that you see reflected in nature that actually induce some sort of response. So all of these things really go hand in hand with human flourishing and really helping people feel comfortable, helping people feel less stressed. We're hearing tons and tons about all of the mental health issues that we deal with. We do a ton of mental health work throughout the state of Colorado and nationally. And we're really getting to a place now where we have actual data that can show if we design spaces this way, we can really help people that are feeling anxious and alone and isolated feel connected again.
Yeah, I mean, really just hearing you talk about your work, human flourishing, it's varied. You have to pay attention to everything. And I also wonder, like for both of you, as you do this work of design, there must be collateral damage, because so much for you personally, because for so much of design, most of us just don't think about it all. We walk into a room and don't think about it, or we're in a city park and we're not looking at how the sidewalk is designed. But I bet the two of you can't help but look. And is that troubling or is that joyful, or?
Depends on the space.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, I think that the best design spaces are those that you don't think about. I mean, I think we often think about things when they're not designed well, because then it's a frustration or it's a barrier. And so it's those spaces where, it's that corridor that's missing a sidewalk. well, I didn't think twice that there's sidewalks on both sides of the street until there's not one. And so I think really it's more, okay, well, what's the solution? Thinking towards then what the solution might be.
And then Kelly, for you and your work, that theme of flourishing, which Tim, I think you're right, it has been lifted out of scripture more and more recently, and I think certainly in a helpful and a healthy way. But Kelly, for you, has that word been helpful? How do you try and live that out in your daily work?
Yeah, so when I introduced my firm, I failed to mention that, our kind of tagline, our strap line is that we connect and enhance communities. So if you ask someone from our company, that would be kind of our mission, is that we go about our work specifically to connect and enhance communities, specifically looking at their transportation. But being on the planning side, that often comes with the responsibility and kind of the expectation that we are looking for ways, not just to connect the community through the kind of physical, tangible infrastructure, but also for connecting and creating these places where the community can come together. So sometimes it's a park, sometimes it's a plaza, sometimes it's, the library, it's a coffee shop, it's the gym, and getting to and from those places safely and efficiently. It's not until we can't access those places that I think the frustration starts to come in. And so I certainly think for me, that word that I've been more attuned to recently is connected and connectedness. So maybe how Tim is speaking to flourishing, I think just with that focus on connectedness. I mean, we've seen in the last couple of years when we aren't connected to one another, how challenging that can be, how detrimental that can be to our communities and to our ability to relate to one another and care for one another. So really trying to think about where are those places that people are coming together and connecting, and how do we ensure that at a project level that we're connecting to one another, that we're listening to one another, but that the project itself as well is connecting people to where they want to go.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is what you described to me as third places. The first place is home, second place is work, and then third place is this wide category. It can be parks, bars, restaurants, coffee shops, but we experienced the loss of many of those places for a couple of years. But I've also heard you talk about, and I think transportation is part of your work. Third places can also be a privilege. Some people can't afford to be in those places. Maybe they can't get to those places. Has that been a part of your work? Maybe in thinking about, from a gospel perspective, those on the margins who don't have that luxury of third places.
Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly a growing emphasis in my field and industry to think about those. And again, the kind of terms that go with that are those that have been historically overburdened or underserved. So you can look at the patterns of the cities and where tangibly dollars have been invested in advancement or not invested in areas where infrastructure is needed. And so thinking critically about why are we investing where we're investing, and what does that mean for the beneficiaries of that investment and of that project? And so sometimes that comes about in doing a really detailed demographic analysis. Who are we serving? What are their needs? How do we meet those needs from a transportation perspective? And sometimes it comes about through community outreach. I mean, a big piece of what I do on a daily basis is engagement with local schools, with neighborhoods that could be impacted, with community organizations, with elected officials, and really ensuring that people have access to the education that they need to make informed decisions, but ultimately to be empowered to be a part of the process. So particularly that work, sometimes on a daily basis, that's working with translators to get materials translated. Other days, that's going out to a community that I've never been to and talking to community leaders. So it looks different, but through the different tasks and different things that need to get done. But ultimately, it's about allowing people to be connected to the process and to the outcome.
Yeah, and just grateful for that particular element of your work, Kelly. So I have one last question for you two. Just hearing you talk, and I think the tradition with the Karam Forum for this part of the event is to focus on local ministries. And it's just encouraging to me to hear about local ministry in this context, like people who don't have the title of pastor, who don't work at a church or work at a nonprofit, but so clearly are doing the work of ministry in a particular locale. So, really grateful for the two of you. And again, just to celebrate that you have been formed, you have been equipped for the work of ministry, to use that New Testament phrase. So much to be celebrated along those lines. So the last question is this, I introduced this topic with the New Testament theme of our hope as Christians, our longing for a new heaven and a new earth, really our hope for this new city, and even that Jaber Crow idea from Wendell Berry, that the new city, in a sense, that heavenly city is already here, and yet we're very much living a part of this earthly city. How does that theme in Scripture, this longing we have for a new heaven and a new earth, in which all of these particular unique places in which we live will be, caught up into God's new creation, does that give you hope? How does that hope impact the work you do? How does it help you even persevere in the work that you do? So Kelly, I'm going to start with you on this last question.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a hopefulness, and I think there's also a relief. To your earlier point, Jeff, as you come in contact with well-designed places and places that may not be designed so well or lacking in many ways, I think we're probably quite astute in noticing things that could change, need to be changed, and noticing sometimes, I think I often get caught up in, there's so much brokenness and so much that needs to change. And so the relief that I experience when I think, okay, but God will redeem this. And it's not my work to redeem that in full, may slightly have a role in incrementally changing something to a space that's a little more inviting and allows for people to be connected. But ultimately, it's Jesus and where that redemption of our built environment will come from. And so I think that there's a relief, I guess, that comes with that.
Yeah, it sounds like it gives you a peace, but also an assurance that you can work with everything you've got on the unique projects that God has put in front of you, and then trust that the other areas of brokenness and poor design, et cetera, ultimately will be taken care of. And also, Kelly, I know you go to community meetings in which a design for a particular place is being talked about, and sometimes people are upset about the design that's being offered. So maybe even
more than sometimes.
The hope is helpful there too.
Yeah.
Tim, how about for you, this idea from Scripture that a new heaven and a new earth is coming, and ultimately a design that is whole, in which all people are healed and the land is healed and the people live in peace in the land. Does this give you hope or any kind of practical way of going about your own work?
It does, but I also feel a big responsibility as a believer to plant the seeds that need to be planted now. Because we talk about flourishing, if we think about plant life, like it's my role here in my little microcosm of time to make as big of an impact as I can on the built environment, and try to do the best I can, knowing that it's going to be redeemed on the stuff that I got wrong at some point. But I think we have as believers a big responsibility to continue to push and to continue to think differently. I'm personally right now working a lot with NREL over in Golden. I'm super excited about all the work that they're doing right now in terms of energy research. It's transformational, like in so many different ways. And if that's like just a little microcosm of what redemption is really going to look like, it's pretty exciting. So
and
it definitely gives me hope.
Yeah, and that idea that your work is spurred on by the fact that ultimately God's creation is going to be new and whole, which doesn't mean we just wait for that to happen and don't work. In fact, this whole idea of faith and work and following Jesus Monday through Friday, I think actually begins at the end with this idea of that city is coming. So let's get to work. Let's roll up our sleeves and do the work. And both of you so clearly are doing that well, thoughtfully, faithfully, and just grateful for you.